I was extremely excited for this game. I had followed the news for it for about 5 years, and for about just as long, I had a poster of Noctis in my bedroom holding the engine blade, and every time I looked at that poster, I could only think of how brilliant this next Final Fantasy game was going to be. The day the game came out, I went on Amazon. I paid $100 to get the day one digital premium edition that came with the season pass. And I played the game solely for the next 2 weeks. I played nothing else. But quite frankly, after finishing it, at least the main game, I thought that I'd wasted about $70. Now, let me start off by being positive. The game was pretty decent. Especially the early parts, they were stellar. Where I was being introduced to new characters and the new combat system, which was simple but still unique and innovative. And the fact that I had seen the prequel movie and the game had provided several references for me to fall back on and have a clearer picture of what was going on was kind of nice, that it validated me having gone out and spent that extra money. But to the game's credit, you didn't have to go out and see the movie. In my opinion, the story was still straightforward enough that had I not seen the movie, I would have still been able to follow it. The first half had me enraptured. It has the massive scale of the world and the quirky, semi-realistic interactions between the main cast, and a somewhat mysterious storyline which lent itself to keeping you intrigued, keeping you wanting to follow along. It also brought back some of the iconic monsters from the past Final Fantasy games and had several references to the older games. Overall, I think Final Fantasy XV did a good job of sticking to its title card of being a Final Fantasy for fans and for first-timers. While its first half is some Game of the Year material, sadly, I think that the second half just falls apart. Rumor has it that Tetsuya Nomura, the artist, designer, and director who has worked on almost all Final Fantasy games, Kingdom Hearts games, and more recently on Xenoblade Chronicles 2, he was taken off of the development team for Final Fantasy 15 specifically. And I don't know if this is true, there's no validation for this, no official statement released, but I feel like this is what contributed mostly to the latter half of the game just falling flat. By the time you get to the latter half, the combat is starting to feel stale. You can press square at the right time to completely negate attacks, but if timing is too big an issue, you can just hold square and it makes you invulnerable to most attacks too. Granted, there are still some attacks that can hurt you. It's just about you being careful of when to dodge, when to hold square. It's not that hard. Also, there's the fact that healing is instantaneous and you can easily disengage if you're still somehow struggling. But don't get me wrong. I always had a dream of being able to throw a weapon above an enemy's head, teleport to it, and then bring it crashing down on them. But you have to realize that after doing that for about 5 hours, I felt like I was playing a game of whack-a-mole instead. I did feel like a badass. I did. But the combat felt button-mashy and not challenging. Harder enemies just had more health and you only died if you forgot to heal, went into a battle severely underleveled, or if billions of particle effects somehow fried your PS4. Or Xbox. Or Xbox if you have one of those. The story in the second half, though, just becomes a convoluted mess. And while it can be argued that I was just too stupid to understand it in one playthrough, it is undeniable that it suffered from pacing issues at least. The cuts in the story were abrupt and jarring, as well as the fact that it felt short for a AAA main series Final Fantasy game. Though, I agree with the argument that the developers wanted the players to focus on an open world that they had created, I just don't think I had those expectations going into a Final Fantasy game. There was also the fact that I thought the game came up severely short in developing some of its characters. I mean, the main cast were brilliantly done, all except for Noctis in my opinion. He wasn't a bad character, he just had a lot less substance to him than the other three did. They all had personality and set opinions along with believable conflicts. But some of the other characters, for example, Core or Aranea, they came in for a short period of time. They had a lot of potential. They had a brilliant design, but we never got to see enough of them to really attach ourselves to them. Getting into a little bit of spoilers, I have some more gripes with how the story was presented. For example, there was a point in the story where Noctis' fiancée, Lady Lunafreya, dies. While at the same time, Ignis, who's your friend slash butler slash driver slash cook, he loses his eyes. Now, in this reveal, I'm sure I was supposed to sympathize with the brooding Noctis who had just lost the love of his life. But because the game had done little or nothing to make me attached to Lady Lunafreya, but it had given Ignis a lot of development, I was nearly unconcerned with the death of one of the most important members to the story. But I was pretty mad that the story had just made one of the characters, who I love, blind without telling me how or why. And I'm hoping that episode Ignis fixes this, but that's to be coming later in a DLC patch. Even some of the main cast, though, did suffer the cold treatment in certain segments, like in the part where it is revealed that Prompto is from the opposing faction, the Empire. The rest of the cast simply pushes it aside in under 10 seconds, and everything seems to be fine. And again, this is pretty optimistic, but I'm hoping that DLC will give us more information about this. But speaking of DLC, you remember those cuts that I called abrupt and jarring? I have little doubt that they were done to create DLC content. But this is the problem. Compromising a smooth narrative for additional content is not worth applauding. But although I will criticize the method, the execution is a different story. The DLC for Final Fantasy XV, at least the stuff that I've played, episode Gladio, has been one of its strongest points. The narrative is self-contained, it's also well explained, the battle system has been revamped to focus on Gladio, there's more of a challenge in fighting the enemies, and of course it gives a more in-depth look into the character since it is his episode. So with the season pass included, I guess I feel like maybe I only wasted about $30. Though let us hope with Nomura on the job for the Final Fantasy VII remake, we all get our money's worth.